From the 22 News Plus studio, this is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of InFocus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. Today, we are learning about the BRYT Intervention Program. Today, I am joined here in the studio by its National Director, Paul Hyry-Dermuth. Good morning, Paul. Thank you very much for joining me. And also across the desk is Zamora Tiva. She is the District and School Support Specialist for the organization. So again, thank you both for spending some time with me. I found out about this organization because being a Westfield resident, I saw that you folks were working with the Westfield schools. And I said to myself, well, I've never heard of this organization. So, which is why you're here. I want to learn more about you both and what the organization does. Paul, let me start with you. Give us an overview of what BRYT is.
Yeah, so Zamora and I are lucky to be part of a team of currently 12 people who support schools and districts across Massachusetts and now beyond with planning and implementing and continuously improving what we call the BRYT intervention. That is it works with kids who have fallen behind academically in association with a mental health disruption or crisis. Kids who may have missed a significant amount of school and are sort of coming back from an extended absence. Sometimes kids who may not have had a single extended absence, but have sort of missed a lot of days here and there and have fallen behind. And sometimes kids who are able to be in the building a little bit more, but are unable to learn because they're really struggling with their mental health while they're in the building. So it's that combination of mental health challenges and then sort of having fallen behind academically and needing integrated support, both to catch up academically and then just to be more well and able to move forward. So BRYT integrates the direct academic support, the direct clinical support, the overall sort of care coordination, and then really works closely with students' families as well.
So Zamora, let me shift over to you now. In your time with the organization, is the children's mental well-being gotten worse? And intervention like this is really a needed benefit so kids can succeed at school.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, we've seen obviously like huge changes pre and post pandemic. I think schools are still definitely experiencing the aftermath of the pandemic and all the impacts that had on development and things like that, like social skills. And so definitely working with a lot of schools that are still seeing a lot of those challenges.
But you guys, the BRYT intervention program was created long before COVID.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to your point, it's gotten worse since then.
I think so.
Is there a trigger out there that students, that maybe in your travels or your research has shown that really is getting students' mental health off on the wrong track? Is there any specific thing you can point to, or is it a multitude of things coming together?
I think a little of both. There's a very strong school and sort of body of research out there that says that things were maybe accelerating a little bit. And then round about 2012, when almost every child suddenly had a smartphone and social media was on those smartphones, then that, I think a lot of people believe, really ramped up the challenge, that the sort of having to constantly be on, all of the comparison, the bullying, the fear that is associated with that, I think is believed to be a major factor. The pandemic, as Zamora said, also a major factor. But the piece about kind of social media and smartphones is in part why there's such a movement in schools now to ban the use of smartphones during the school day.
So what are the thoughts on that, banning smartphones in schools? There's two sides to that. There's the security side of, I want my child to be able to have access to me if there's, God forbid, there's an issue in the school, versus, helping children's mental health. What do you guys prefer? Do you prefer to see phones banned or some sort of limited use of phones in schools?
What do you think?
Great question. Yeah. I mean, I think that I support banning, but I do think it's going to be challenging to implement. I think that schools are going to really have to work with families and with students to figure out like how to make that happen and how to really get buy-in for it. I used to be a teacher for a little while, and
so you know what it's like being in the school, in the classroom, right?
Yeah. And I do think it's had like a pretty big impact on things like attention span and, things like fights in schools. When kids have social media, they can all like text each other and everybody will know like instantly,
right,
that there's something going on. And then that will actually draw kids into the hallway. And so I do think it's created a lot of like, new issues. But I hope that schools can work with families and students to figure out how to get buy-in.
How to best utilize phones in schools, whether it's, for learning purposes. I mean, calculators are on phones nowadays. I know, and I know some teachers are utilizing phones for schoolwork. Okay, class, look up X, and determine whatever it is. But Paul, you pointed out really, believe it or not, the first iPhone was 2008, something like that. So when kids started getting social media and using them in 2012, that's really been the turning point.
There's a lot of data out there that suggests that has been a major factor in what's driving the youth mental health crisis. Again, we don't think that that's the only cause, and addressing smartphones in schools is not the only solution. But I think it's hard to argue that it's a factor. Yeah.
I see it with adults too. Adults are less social. Personally social. We're all social on our phones, but less personally social. We all hide behind a screen nowadays, which has to hurt everyone's mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like this epidemic of loneliness, right? And so part of that is like trying to find ways for like kids to connect to each other, to come out of their shell, to build community within schools.
Wow.
But yeah, definitely think it impacts adults and kids.
We are up on our first commercial break. There's plenty more to talk about, so stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of In Focus. Today, we're talking about the BRYT Intervention Program. I've got Paul Hyry-Dermuth and Zamora Teva across the desk from me. Thank you both for joining me. Greatly appreciate your time. We talked a little bit of overview about the BRYT and the reasons for it, and it's student mental health is really the bottom line. Let's get into a little bit more now of how you do what you do. So you're working with students across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but in multiple states. But how do you help students with their mental health struggles and their academic struggles?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, there's sort of two levels. There's the work that Zamora and I and our other teammates do to support schools, but then the real work is happening in schools by school staff. And I think we should maybe start there.
Okay.
Maybe give you a chance to describe it.
Yeah, for sure. So in my role as a district and school support specialist, I work with about 20 schools across Western and Central Mass.
Wow.
And then on our team, we have several other folks who are also in that role. So they also have a caseload of schools that they're supporting. So really what we're doing is working with the staff, administrators, counselors, teachers, and trying to get sort of everyone on the same page so that we can plan with them, implement them and kind of coach them through setting up and then like continuously growing and improving their BRYT intervention. So when we meet with a school, we try to help them identify like what are the resources that they have that they can use to establish a BRYT model. So we think about...
So you're trying to utilize what schools already have in place to capitalize on that so you can address the issues of students.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we think about like, is there a space that they can use? So a core part of the intervention is to have a space that's set up, usually a classroom, but it's designed to really support students in learning self-regulation skills. So you think about like comfortable seating, low lights, artwork, things like that. So it feels comfortable. So when you walk in, like you kind of take a deep breath. And then there are also zones for really plugging into your academic work once you're kind of like, okay, I decompressed. Now I can, work on something with some adult support.
So is this a one-on-one situation in the schools or is it in group environments or both?
Yeah. So if you think, we can think about it this way. So there will be a clinical staff member, we call it a clinical coordinator. It's a master's level social worker or licensed mental health counselor or similar. And then an academic coordinator who sometimes a teacher, sometimes a carefully selected aide or paraprofessional. that person's work is to help students both figure out a kind of a time frame to get back to a full schedule of classes, and then secondly, help them with the makeup work, that is involved having fallen behind. The clinical coordinator is working with kids directly from a clinically informed perspective, not so much long therapy sessions as it might be 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, helping students with the very practical challenges of coming back to school, having, peers and teachers asking them where they've been, sort of all the things. And if we look at it from a student and family perspective, then what we might think about is a student maybe has been in an inpatient hospitalization, program for 2 weeks. Let's say they're in high school, they're coming back to school. 2 weeks is a lot of time to miss, the curriculum in high school.
Right.
But what will happen is as soon as possible, the BRYT team in the school will reach out to the family, let them know that their job is to prepare the way for them to come back, meet with them prior to reentering school. And then from that first day on, really have a very supported, individualized chart, kind of course for the student to work through, but happening in the community of that room. So there will be, anywhere from maybe 15 to 20 students at a large high school kind of enrolled in BRYT at any time, but they won't all be accessing it at the same time.
Okay.
Different, amounts of time on different days.
So how do people find the BRYT program? Like, for example, I live in Westfield High School, Westfield Technical Academy, St. Mary's, whichever schools are involved. For the students, the at-risk students, the students affected, do the parents seek out that help through the school, or does the school approach the parents and the families and the caregivers and say, your student needs this help so that we can get them back on the academic track of their peers, so that they graduate on time, their learning isn't set back? How does the interaction work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it can kind of happen both ways, but typically within a school, there's sort of a referral process. So usually the existing counselors are involved, and sometimes administrators, in identifying students who are navigating challenges. And so there's usually a team at the school who will kind of be talking through, like, okay, what might this student need in this moment in time, and like kind of like what level of support do they need. And so usually that might be right. Like in a school, there's usually like an ecosystem of a lot of different supports at various levels of intensity that might be appropriate for a student at a given time. And so BRYT ideally is like one of many supports that are available.
Okay.
And then those teams work to figure out, okay, so we tried this and that wasn't kind of like enough. Let's try this. So BRYT we think of as like at the tier 3, but transitional, which is sort of like school speak.
Mm-hmm.
But really for students who have intensive mental health challenges, but can be served in a short-term program. So usually students might spend like an average of 8 to 12 weeks, sometimes more, sometimes less, associated with the program, but they're not spending all day, every day in the BRYT classroom, because the goal is always to get them back into all of their regularly scheduled classes.
Right. So the students are working with the individual communities, individual schools, current staff, or are there BRYT staffing individuals that go into the schools that work with those students?
It can be a little bit of a mix. So in many cases, a school will hire or assign staff specifically for BRYT. There are some cases where maybe in a smaller school where working with students who need BRYT might be part of someone's job, because it doesn't justify dedicating staff only for BRYT. But yeah, and so sometimes it's an external hire. Sometimes maybe there's someone within the school who really wants to do this work. Sometimes a school might reorganize a little bit, because really every school has students with these needs. The challenge is that not every school is well organized, right, to address them. So sometimes it can be a little bit of a reorganization to assign staff, to work with these students. And whichever way schools get there, we're happy to work with them. The only other thing I just wanted to add is this is not a special education program. It doesn't require a 45-day evaluation or anything like that in order for a student to participate. A student can participate in BRYT the next day after there's a meeting with them and their parents to explain the program, invite them and welcome them to the community. So we say it really speeds things up because students can be supported right away, and then it kind of slows things down in terms of often in schools, people sort of feel like special education is the only way to address challenges that students have, which is not the case. And so we think it's a really nice example of a powerful, what we would call general education intervention that can support kids who are really struggling very quickly in real time, very flexibly. And then when they're past that critical period, transition them so that they don't need to have this support anymore.
And it sounds as if my initial interpretation was it sounded more like a tutoring program, but it's more than a tutoring program. It's not only tutoring the schoolwork, but it's the mental health help as well. So to get that student back to the regular classroom. That's the goal, if I understand this correctly, get the student back to their standard classroom, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So we think of it as an integrated support. So integrating both the academic and the clinical supports, and then also working with the family.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the goal is progress toward graduation with their peers. Yep.
And that's what every student wants, every parent and caregiver wants.
Yep.
You had sent me some slides that I have up here now, kind of a little bit of a bit of an overview on how BRYT does what it does. But these statistics I really wanted to get into. Zamora, just walk me through some of these stats.
Sure. Yeah. So these are some statistics from that the CDC gathered a couple of years ago, I believe, maybe 2023. And they really just show sort of like the depth of the youth mental health crisis. So like we were talking about before, there was a youth mental health crisis that preceded COVID, and then COVID really exacerbated it.
Right.
But it definitely was already there. So, I mean, some of this is pretty disturbing to think about. Like 20% of high school students considered suicide during the pandemic.
Right.
29% reported a parent lost a job. 44% felt persistently sad and hopeless.
The one that really strikes me is the first one. The youngest of our children, the 2 to 8 year olds, having mental health issues at that young an age, and then the bottom two, 50% of mental illness begins by age 14 and 75% by age 24.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
Yeah. And we do work with schools at every level. So we do work with about 35 elementary schools across the state. So they are working to support really young kids through some serious challenges.
Well, and then the other thing I think, Patrick, that you're picking up on is the scope of the challenge. There's another statistic we don't have here, but typically from the initial onset of a mental health challenge for a child until they're getting services, the average is 8 years.
8 years?
Yeah. And so, from that very first point until there's treatment. Yeah. And it may be that there's some time before, there's recognition of it as a mental health challenge. And so, but yeah, it's staggering. And so it's why we believe schools in general are so critical in addressing kids' mental health, because kids spend time in school.
Right. And
that's a very, very powerful place to do both prevention and then intervention work.
We have so much more to talk about, but we are up on our second commercial break. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of InFocus. Today in the 22 News Plus studio, I have Paul Hyrie-Zermuth and Zamora Teva. They are from the BRYT Intervention Program. We're here talking about it because it's a new program that I had just heard about maybe a few weeks ago because it was happening in Westfield. But Zamora, to your point, it's all over. It's all over the state of Massachusetts, and we're into other portions of the country as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We work with over 250 schools across Massachusetts, and then we work with 55 schools that are out of state.
So by looking at this map, it's kind of an Oregon seems like the outlier. I'd love to know why you're in Oregon.
I'm sure I can speak to that. We met an amazing leader in Oregon at a national conference. She got very excited and worked to bring BRYT to her district, which is Portland. And then someone who had worked at BRYT in a Massachusetts school moved to Bend, Oregon, and brought the information there. And they had some very enlightened district leaders, and they implemented BRYT in all of their schools. And then the neighboring town of Redmond, Oregon, implemented BRYT in all of its schools. So there was a while there were 55 schools in just those 2 districts that were implementing BRYT.
And right now we're looking at the state of Massachusetts, and it seems as if you're in every county.
Yes.
Yeah, we've been tried to be very intentional about growing BRYT across the state, and we had a recent investment from the State Department of Mental Health and from the legislature that have allowed us to provide seed funding to almost 50 schools at this point over the last year and a half, and so it's really grown. And we wanted to make sure that we were growing all over the state. And so, still have a long way to go in Western Mass, but we're working on it.
But that's okay. And speaking of Western Mass, these are the 4 counties of Western Mass. Maura, you want to talk a little bit about the schools that are listed here?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Western Mass, we are working with elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, in both very rural, very small areas, and also in urban areas with bigger schools. So it's really a wide range. Like Paul said, it was really important to us with this expansion opportunity to be able to work with schools in every county, and particularly focusing on sort of being able to seed fund BRYT in schools with high proportions of high need students.
So is it part of your roles to be on the road meeting with superintendents, principals, to talk about the program and getting local school districts to see the value and start to incorporate it into their daily lives?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep.
All right, let's go to the next slide. This is a ton of information, folks, and I apologize for it, but I'm going to leave it there for a minute or two just so you can absorb it all. But I want to continue the conversation about the work that you folks are doing. So you've been in existence about a dozen years or so.
20 years.
20 years. Oh, even more than I thought. I thought it was in the early 2010s. You've worked with students back in 2008 that are now they're adults. I mean, they're working, and have you kept in touch, or have the school districts updated you on how those students over the course of the last 20 years have adapted to life?
We haven't been able to do a longitudinal study, but there are some touch points, including, I don't know if you remember Katrina Kincaid.
Yes.
Who is a BRYT alum from high school and who came back to our gala this past year and shared her story. She is now out in California doing work in a school department, actually. And so just as an example, she spoke to hundreds of people at our gala to share her story from high school and beyond. Probably the most famous BRYT alum, having been Miss Massachusetts as well. But there are hundreds and now thousands of kids out there who have benefited from this intervention. And we hear back both from schools about some of those students, and once in a while we hear back directly.
Fantastic. Valuable information. I applaud you both and your teams for what you're doing in our school districts, because mental health in our students is, and the data points to it, 75% by the age of 24. The data points to it. So I applaud you for doing what you can to keep our kids on track, both emotionally and academically. Thanks for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
So much for having us.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.